Welcome to The Landscape, your podcast about America's parks and public lands, and today about Venezuela's public lands, or public oil, I guess, too. I'm Aaron Weiss with the Center for Western Priorities in Denver on a very snowy but beautiful day out there.
And I'm Kate Groetzinger in Salt Lake City. Today we're talking to an oil industry watchdog from FieldNotes about what Maduro's capture by the U.S. means for oil and gas producers here at home. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum has also been making the rounds on Fox News, cheering on Trump's actions in Venezuela and calling on U.S. companies to start drilling in Venezuela, which we also touch on. But before we do that, the news.
We're going to talk about Karen Bud Phelan today. She's an Interior Department official who we've been following for years here at the Center for Western Priority, and she is now facing corruption allegations over a water deal related to the Thacker Pass lithium mine in Nevada. Today, Karen Bud Phelan is the third highest official at the Interior Department. The last time around, during the first Trump administration, she was the Deputy Interior Solicitor. She actually claimed at one point that she had turned down an offer to run the Bureau of Land Management, which is notable because she said she would have had to sell off her family's cattle operations. Well, as it turns out, during the first Trump administration, her husband signed a $3.5 million water rights deal with the developers of that Thacker Pass lithium mine. And the payout depended on the Interior Department approving environmental reviews for the mine. If at any point it looked like the mine wasn't going to get built, Thacker Pass could have pulled out and the Phelans would not have gotten the money. So records obtained by Jimmy Tobias at Public Domain show that Karen Bud Phelan actually had lunch with the mining executives in November 2019. Just 2 months after that, the Interior Department started fast-tracking the mine approval process. Now, despite all of that going on, her financial disclosures from 2018 to 2021 never mentioned that water deal or the pending payout. Sure enough, Thacker Pass did end up getting that fast-track approval in the final week of the first Trump administration. So the watchdog group, Public Citizen, says that Karen Bud Phelan certainly should have disclosed that deal to the Interior Department, and the Interior Department, of course, should have disclosed that deal to the public. And now, Karen Bud Phelan is back in a more powerful role overseeing our public lands. Her financial disclosures from this time around were only released after reporters and others, including the Center for Western Priorities, asked repeatedly for them. And those show she still has millions of dollars in ranch land. As recently as May, she still had investments in companies like ExxonMobil. There is a whole lot more that we still don't know, including her ethics agreements from both Trump administrations, which still have not been released. So, the Phelan Ranch is still in business with Thacker Pass today. They have to keep using that water until the mine wants to use it to drill for lithium. Did she disclose any of that? They are still monitoring water levels in that valley through the ranch wells on the Phelan Ranch. Also, Karen Bud Phelan has massive ranching operations, including public lands. Lots of questions here that could cast a shadow on basically any decision that crossed Karen Bud Phelan's desk as the number 3 official at Interior today. I think it's safe to say this is not the last we have heard of this story.
And we're chasing down those ethics agreements as we speak, right, Aaron?
As we speak. They were supposed to show up this week. Now, maybe the end of the month, we are asking those questions. Our guest today is Kelly Mitchell, an author at FieldNotes, which is a new watchdog organization that conducts investigative research on the oil and gas industry. She is here to talk about what President Trump's capture, kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro could mean for U.S. oil and gas companies, as well as drilling here at home, especially in the West. So, Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to start by noting something that happened actually here in Colorado this week. There was an oil and gas lease sale that was a total bust, 0 acres leased. There was a similar failure in Wyoming at the end of December. These are acres that BLM has now tried to lease twice, and no one took them. So if the industry is sitting on a pile of unused permits to drill and leases that they could develop at any point down the road, And the Trump administration can't even get oil companies to bid on those leases here in the U.S. when they're offered up. What is the pitch to invest billions to develop these Venezuelan reserves?
Well, I would certainly love to be in the room when Trump makes that pitch because I don't see a tremendous amount of upside. Like you said, oil drilling is down in the US, oil prices are down. You know, some of the most profitable and best engineered oil firms in the world are not even drilling at home. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, you have incredibly expensive, viscous oil to extract. You have crumbling infrastructure. You have a government that could change overnight at any minute. I just don't see how any rational CEO could dive in there and still keep his job.
You mentioned that it's expensive to produce oil in Venezuela. Why not just continue to produce here at home? Or is that what these companies are going to do despite what we're hearing out of the administration?
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot smarter for companies to produce here at home if that actually is their goal. Right next door to Venezuela, there's also the country of Guyana, and off the shore there's abundant oil resources. That's higher quality oil. It's easier to extract. And so it's a pretty losing gamble to move into Venezuela if they're not even touching, some of the best oil reserves in the world.
Explain real quick, why is the Venezuelan oil lower quality or more expensive than what's nearby, either in Guyana or what's here in the ground in the U.S.?
Well, when oil comes out of the ground, it does not all look the same. I think we kind of all have a visual of like a goopy black barrel that we've seen in a cartoon at some point. But, a lot of the oil that's produced here in the US, it's very light. It almost has like a clearish smoothie-like feel to it. The oil that comes out of Venezuela is incredibly heavy and incredibly thick. So you can't even move it through normal oil and gas pipelines without adding additional chemicals to dilute the oil, to make it easier to transport. In addition, a lot of these wells have very fast depletion. So once you drill it, they run out of oil pretty quickly. And so that means you have to sustain a pretty high pace of drilling just to stay flat, just to, keep oil production at a steady level. And then you throw on top of that the old infrastructure and the political uncertainty, and it becomes a very high cost operation.
So, with all of that being said, Doug Burgum, Interior Secretary, has been making the rounds on Fox, really touting like the oil drilling potential in Venezuela and saying like it's not going to take the U.S. very long to get in there. They can get in right now and start pumping. Yay! He sort of moonlights in his other role. What is he called, Aaron? His
well, I think
Energy Dominance Council.
Yeah, or Venezuelan Minister of Petroleum this week.
Right, but no, he has an official other role in the Trump administration, right? And it's the
Energy Dominance Council. They gave him a made-up title, yeah.
Right, so he's sort of acting in that title, I think, on Fox, saying this. Why is he saying that? Is he lying or is he dumb? And if he's lying, why is he lying?
I don't think he's dumb. Unfortunately, people like Doug Burgum and Chris Wright, they actually understand the oil and gas industry. I'm sure if you were talking to them, off camera, they would be very well aware of the risks involved here. But the truth is, the way the Trump administration operates, it's very much a dear leader mentality. And Trump announced this invasion and basically promised a Venezuelan oil boom on the back end. And I think it'd be very difficult for a member of the administration to publicly counteract that. Maybe Burgum and Wright believe that by selling this vision to the American people, it'll compel oil companies to act. But I think all of that remains to be seen.
There's a dynamic that may be appearing here. You flagged it a little bit on, I think, X or Blue Sky. We saw a Wildfile piece suggesting that there may be a rift developing between the oil majors, the Exxon Mobils and Chevrons of the world, and the smaller players, especially that we see here in the West, the folks who are like members of the Western Energy Alliance. Do you see that starting to develop, and what's behind it?
I absolutely see a rift there. It's a rift that's been bubbling a little bit under the surface throughout the entire Trump administration. But the truth is, CEOs of Exxon and Chevron can go into the White House tomorrow and say, fine, we'll drill in Venezuela, but we want tax breaks. We want subsidies. We want you to guarantee the money up front. They can kind of ask for the world in return for fulfilling Trump's vision. Meanwhile, if we're continuing to bring more Venezuelan oil into the United States, if we're continuing to expand oil and gas production in Venezuela, that only pushes down the price of oil for domestic producers. I mean, a lot of them are barely making money as it is. And if Trump wants to keep oil and gas, or oil rather, at $50 for the foreseeable future, we are going to see a lot of independent drillers go out of business.
So it seems like, and you just mentioned this, that the oil industry has some leverage over the Trump administration because the Trump administration needs them to go drill in Venezuela or else they all look really stupid. What could that leverage look like? I think in your memo you mentioned massive tax breaks, subsidies, direct payments. What do you think we'll see if, it seems like we'll see some of this?
Yeah, I think it's a real question, right? If the oil industry actually has any intention of moving forward with this, or if they're just going to play into the theater, say the right things for Trump, maybe wait till he's out of office so there's a new Congress and then they can kind of quietly extract themselves from the situation. But I think there's a couple things they would want immediately. So Exxon and ConocoPhillips are both owed money from the Venezuelan government. They fought them in international court after their assets were nationalized. So that's billions of dollars that could come into their pockets very quickly. We could also, like you said, see the U.S. government basically promising to take the downside risk of new development or to pay for the infrastructure upgrades or to do some cash outlays right at the start to incentivize maybe not returning Venezuela to its oil heydays, but at least stabilizing the oil regime there with the help of American producers. I think there's quite a lot that the oil companies could put on the table right now and potentially get.
What does this mean in terms of refining, in both directions? Because one of the things we've seen mentioned is because this oil is so viscous, there was a whole conversation that you and I had offline yesterday about pentanes and dilutants and all of that. And then that would be going from the U.S. to Venezuela. And then is there capacity here in the States to refine this much thicker Venezuelan oil that's coming out?
I think the Trump administration, like you said, recently announced that all this dilutant to help make the oil flow will be coming from the U.S. So that's potentially kind of a quick win for oil companies. A lot of that dilutant basically comes as like a byproduct of oil and gas drilling. And so easy way to make some additional money if that dilutant's being supplied from the U.S. instead of other countries. And then, I think more broadly for the refiners, I am not a fantastic expert in refiners, but I do think there's a couple things we've seen. Phillips 66 has indicated that they could immediately probably take an extra 100,000 barrels of new refining capacity from Venezuela. We know that Paul Singer and his company Elliott have recently purchased the Citgo refineries in the U.S., which previously belonged to Venezuela, which would make one believe they are well equipped to handle Venezuelan oil. So potentially they could very quickly start accepting some larger volumes. And so I do think the refiners actually stand to gain quite a bit in this equation.
So you mentioned in the memo that we've referenced that you have some suspicions and potential evidence about how the administration has been engaged with the Elliott folks who now own Citgo that you're exploring. Can you share any of that with us, or is it still early stages?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. It is very, very early days. Basically, the background is Venezuela was sort of put into a position where it had to sell off a lot of assets, and one of their sort of cream of the crop assets that were being sold were these Citgo properties. So a bidding war began. Now, Venezuela currently basically kind of contests the outcome of that bidding war. Like, they don't actually believe that Elliott should be the rightful owner. So there's certainly some interesting political things that will change depending on how negotiations are going between the Trump administration and the new regime, old regime, whatever the current regime is. But we do have some, just some kind of early public records indicating that the folks from Elliott and Amber were meeting with very high level Trump officials starting in October, which is kind of coincidentally the time when a lot of these Venezuelan war plans seem to have been getting off the ground. That's a deep speculation on my part that those two things are connected, but it's certainly something we're poking around on.
What kind of unexpected effects could we see here? I'm thinking about this push to export American LNG in particular, right? I mean, if suddenly there's less production happening onshore because you've got this Venezuelan crude in the mix globally, I mean, does that suddenly change the picture in terms of what the Trump administration was trying to do, exporting methane from the U.S. off to China or somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, not all, but some of the gas that flows into our system is called associated gas. It's the gas that's produced as a byproduct of oil drilling. So, if we do see a kind of collapse in oil prices, or, basically producers either refusing to do new drilling activity or shutting in wells, we're going to see a decline in associated gas production, which, yeah, certainly could throw a wrench in any number of plans, whether that's LNG or the kind of gas craze that the AI industry seems to be fueling right now. So yeah, I'd be very curious to see where that goes. Going back to the dilutants though, if suddenly there's a new market for US dilutants, that actually helps gas producers because it is a byproduct of gas exploration. So I think there's just like a ton of unknowns right now in terms of how this is going to kind of shape the overall energy picture.
So, tying this back to public lands, and I understand that we're talking about a global commodity and global markets, but do we really know what this means for drilling on public lands in the West in terms of do you think that this effort to increase drilling in Venezuela will have any tangible impact on lease sales, for example, on public lands in the West anytime soon?
Yeah. I mean, it would certainly be the greatest irony of all time if the Trump administration is the one that slows down oil leasing because of a grand Venezuelan gambit. But yeah, I think it's a big question. I think we saw a really similar thing during the end of the first Trump administration and the early Biden administration. When oil prices took a tank, there's certainly a less appetite for new oil and gas drilling. Going back to Burgum, I mean, he sold this idea that there's this American balance sheet and public lands contain this tremendous number of oil and gas reserves and critical minerals and things that are going to make our country great. But it may not turn out to be true because at the end of the day, if companies aren't willing to take the risk of new drilling and if communities can continue to mobilize and sue and engage in the political process to slow these all down, I think there's a real chance we can protect some public lands.
And it kind of strikes me that it's, you mentioned that irony, that they sort of are damned if they do, damned if they don't in this situation because they want more drilling out of Venezuela, which would be bringing down the price of oil and be benefiting those big oil producers at the expense of the smaller ones in the West. So either that happens or there's more drilling in the West, but it kind of can't be both. Is that right? Am I thinking about that correctly? Or it's no new drilling anywhere?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, my vote's for no new drilling anywhere if he's considering that. But this is just a very different oil and gas industry than we had, let's say in 2012. I mean, I think in 2012, drillers would go anywhere for any price, extract as much as they could. And they're just not in this reality anymore. A lot of these companies in that decade lost hundreds of billions of dollars. And so you now have investors and board members who are no longer measuring success based on the levels of production and are instead measuring success based on whether or not you can maintain dividends and share buybacks and continue to show a really healthy balance sheet. So yeah, I think it will be very hard for the Trump administration to achieve a simultaneous goal of increasing oil production around the world and increasing it at home.
Fiscal discipline still being the order of the day.
Yes.
Last question for you. What aren't people paying attention to right now on Venezuela? What are you going to be looking for that you think would be the first indicators of what direction this is all going?
Yeah, great question. Personally, I'm really fascinated by this divide within the oil industry. While the oil industry certainly isn't monolith in terms of how these different companies sort of operate, what their business strategies are, they have kind of been monolith in their support for Republican administrations and for the Trump administration in particular. And if we really see this administration start to take active steps that hurt domestic drillers, I'm fascinated just to know a little bit more about what that response is going to look like. I don't see them suddenly becoming huge backers of a Democratic candidate, but if the industry finds itself kind of lobbying at cross purposes, what does that actually mean for the speed and aggressiveness at which the Trump administration can issue, really bad policy? So that's, I think, something we're going to be keeping a very close eye on.
All they want is regulatory certainty, then international uncertainty plays into that, right?
Exactly, yeah.
One thing that also strikes me as ironic is that the biggest voice that advocated for Western oil and gas producers has been silenced, and that's Kathleen Sagama, who was floated as the BLM nominee and then removed at the 11th hour because of her January 6th views. So maybe we'll see who the new champion of Western oil and gas producers is here soon, if nothing else.
Or maybe they're hiring in Venezuela now.
Or maybe, they haven't hired one yet, because they've been oddly silent. But they have been getting everything they want up until now.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
All right, we'll leave it there. Kelly Mitchell is an author at FieldNotes. Kelly, really appreciate all of your insight into all of this mess, and who knows what we will see next in Venezuela.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll all be different in a couple days, so we'll find out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for chatting.
All right, here's a little good news to end the episode. Congress has released a final 2026 spending budget for Interior, the EPA, and the DOE. Most interior agencies will see small cuts from last year, but nothing close to the massive reductions President Trump called for in his proposed 2026 budget. Funding will remain high enough to keep national parks running, which the National Parks Conservation Association says is critical after a terrible year for parks last year. Still, Trump's priorities show up elsewhere in the bill, including more money for oil and gas development, no money for environmental justice programs, and more funding for law enforcement on public lands.
Well, that will do it for us today. If you enjoyed this episode, go rate us. Go find us on Instagram and TikTok. Our colleague Sterling doing some stellar work over there. And share this episode with a friend who loves public lands and politics, or Latin American dictators, if that's your kind of thing. As always, you can reach us at podcast@westernpriorities.org.
Thanks to Kelly Mitchell from FieldNotes, and thanks to you for listening to The Landscape.